All right. So we have talked a lot about some teams who might be in the running for the 2024. I'm tripping. 2025 draft. It always throws me off that it's the year after. And there's a lot of people making a lot of assertions about what teams must do in the 2025 draft. And me and Cole just wanted to have some people on here who've been thinking about this 2025 draft much longer than somebody who's like, hey, we're 1-4. We might have to think about the draft has to kind of get an idea on what this draft is and some of the conversations that are surrounding it. So we have Corey Kinnan on the show. Corey.
I'm happy to be back. It's always a pleasure to join the show. So, and it's also 1-5, just to make things worse. You said 1-4; they're actually 1-5. So,
I'm just saying what teams got to happen when they got to 1-4, right?
Throwing gasoline
lose to Philly and start thinking about the draft. We start thinking about the draft the second half in Washington. We're like, oh no, it's hopeless. Okay, cool. It's time to move on. Like even the most hopeful of us were like, yeah, dog, it's done. Like if you want to run for office in the state of Ohio, it doesn't matter what party you are on. You could be in the what's the Reform Party from like the 2000s. You could be in a Reform Party. Your only issue can be, hey, I will bench Deshaun Watson on day one, and you're gonna win. Like I don't even say might win. You're gonna win. I don't know how you're gonna convince people you have that authority, but you can probably do it if you're governor. Like I'll withhold fundings unless they like bench Deshaun. There's a way you can make it happen there. So if anybody wants to add that to the ticket, I'm fine with it.
That would be funny, with all the dome funding issues going on right now. They're like, no, we're not going to fund your dome until you cut this guy.
We won't have him step foot in that dome.
We're gonna pay him.
I don't
just
think
gonna
they
pay
have to
him
worry
to stay
about
home. We're gonna pay him to stay home.
Hey, look, it doesn't. It's just the appearance that you solved the problem, Cove. Like, it's not the actual effectiveness of it. But Dalton, can you introduce yourself to this audience too as well?
Yeah, so my name is Dalton Miller. I used to work for Pro Football Network for about 3 years. I did full-time stuff, NFL side of things, but I started as an NFL draft analyst back in 2016, started a website in 2017 called Blue Chip Scouting, and then just kind of built from there. I had weaseled my way into a professional setting in the NFL draft and in the NFL world for a while. And then this past September, I had a kid, and I said, you know what? I just kind of want to do my own thing. And so I quit, and I've been jobless ever since. I'm unemployed, and I'm loving it right now.
Appreciate that. Glad you're having fun there. All right, let's jump into this draft class. Just an overall synopsis of this class. There's usually like two ways you categorize it. Is this an up year draft class? Is this a down year draft class? How would you categorize like the whole of it, and where do you think the pick strength is going to be in this year's draft? As far as like, is this a draft you really need to have a top 5 pick in, or is this a draft that you'll be fine if you're somewhere around the mid first round because all the talent is around the same caliber?
Corey, is it Fall Out Boy that does the Down song? Yeah, that's this draft. It couldn't really be any more down, in my opinion. I mean, we've kind of heard it from some of the bigger names in the industry already, but it's usually 15 to 20 kind of first round grades you'll get on a normal year. And this year we might be pushing like 10 to 12 legitimate first round grades. When you look at positional value, this class has strength in positions that the NFL doesn't care about as much. Running back, tight end, defensive tackle, even a little bit, but quarterback, edge is coming around a little bit, but quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, those positions are struggling so far.
It would make sense because we had so many strong receiver classes, and then like offensive line classes have been like a good one's a dime a dozen, and you just had a good one last year. So I'd be shocked if you had a good one again this year. What do you feel like for a team that's struggling right now? Like if you're a 1-win team per se, like Jacksonville or Cleveland, what do you think their strategy should be for this year's draft? And is it just one of those drafts where it's like, hey, there's not that many players available, you can't be picky, you just got to take who's best available on your board?
I think that depends on if you got your quarterback or not. Like I think even whether Jacksonville has their quarterback or not, they're paying their quarterback a lot of money. in the first year of that new contract, and they think they have their guy. Try him out with a different head coach and play caller. New England just drafted their guy, so I think they're in very different situations than I would say Cleveland is. Yeah, Cleveland's paying their guy a lot of money, but they absolutely do not have the quarterback. I don't see how he gets another year. I don't know if he has another 4 games in Cleveland, to be completely honest. So I think that just depends. New England, you look at their roster, they desperately need a wide receiver, and they desperately need a left tackle. They have their quarterback. What their clear draft need is pretty evident. Jacksonville kind of the same way. They need some wide receiver. They just drafted a wide receiver who's pretty darn good. They need an offensive tackle. They're not drafting quarterback, but they could also go defensive back. And if you want to look at a strength of this class, if you need a cornerback, you got a cornerback. And I think Jacksonville could very easily take Travis Hunter if they really, really wanted to. They could take Will Johnson if they really, really wanted to. Sit at the top of the board. New England, they could go if they wanted to take a risk on an offensive tackle early, or Luther Burden or somebody like that, a wide receiver like that. Like, they could do that. When you talk about Cleveland, I do think they have some premium positions. For whether or not you love Jedrick Wills or not, I think he's probably been their best offensive lineman in the last 2 weeks. And the way they restructured his deal, I think you can imagine they're probably going to give him some sort of short-term deal to come back. They have a corner. They have an edge rusher. So that leaves really wide receiver too, or you don't have your quarterback. And if you're in the position to take the quarterback in a otherwise quarterbackless class, like, I think that's a conversation you really have to entertain, especially in a class where we're saying like offensive tackles, yeah, it's a need, but Jack Conklin at the end of the day is still under contract too beyond the season. So like, you don't have to cut him. So like, you still have DeJuan Jones you can have hope for. So I think you have to take the quarterback.
How do you feel about drafting quarterbacks, especially in a weak draft like that? Because the history of it has not been something that's kind of bowed out. You look at 2013 was a historically weak class, and then the top quarterbacks in that class, I think Geno Smith went in the second round, but it was EJ Manuel who in the first round of that class. And I think there was another quarterback in the 2013 class that went in the first round. I can't remember, but it was just probably some.
It was just EJ Manuel,
dude. It was just
It was just EJ, and then Geno fell to the first pick of the second round, right? And that seems a lot better now than it did 5 years ago. You look at, what was the last one? Oh, the Kenny Pickett draft class. That was 2022. It's another stinker of a class. Yeah, and then it do you worry that because these quarterbacks are maybe the best prospects in a weak class of prospects, the scrutiny is not high enough on it for the certainty to be there about those picks that would usually be there if we were talking about, somebody who was in the top 5 of prospects in a really strong draft class?
I would feel that way if there wasn't 1 or 2 guys that I think would justify the pick. 2014 or 2013, I'm sorry, you couldn't justify one. You couldn't justify one of those guys. 2022, you couldn't justify one of those guys. Even Kenny Pickett at pick 22 or 21 or 20, wherever he was.
Yeah, I remember people talking about Desmond Ritter sliding into the first.
Yeah, there were people who were hyping up Desmond Ritter as a top 10 pick that year.
Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, and all it is
first overall. That's where we were at, trying to force those guys. And as much as this quarterback class isn't good, Shedeur Sanders would easily be the top quarterback in either of those classes. I think Jalen Milroe would easily be the top quarterback in either of those classes.
Yes.
You can even make, and Cam Ward's not my cup of tea as a quarterback, but you can make a case that Cam Ward would have been the best quarterbacks in either of those classes as well. So as much as it is not a great class, I do think there are at least a name or 2 at the top that you could justify taking at the top.
Let's talk about these quarterbacks, because I think there are. This feels like a very serious interview, but let's talk about the quarterbacks, because I think there are some concerns and some things that excite you about both. With Shedeur, when I watch him, I'm like, he has the best arm talent in this draft class. He could fit into windows at times that I don't think anybody else in this class is capable of. Some of the throws he's capable of making, I think, are very impressive. Where I do worry about Shedeur, outside of the whole Sanders family stuff, which is just separate from just evaluating him as a player, is I don't think he's a great athlete, which is surprising from somebody whose last name is Sanders and resembles his dad so much. And he does have a lot of bad habits. I think he's occurred over his college career, especially when it comes to trying to evade pressure. He kind of rolls into pressure a lot. He has the highest percentage of all the major prospects of sack responsibility here. And I worry about somebody who does that, who's not a great athlete, and then transitioning to a game in the NFL, which is going to be way more athletic than any kind of game that he's played in Pac-12 or the Big 12. And that being something that makes it so you can't really get to what his strengths are on the field. With Milroe, he's a bit more raw than I think a lot of the other prospects here. He's played a lot of football, though, admittedly, because he played even his freshman year at Alabama. And you've seen the growth over him. The one thing with him, he's had, 3 or 4 different offensive coordinators. I think a new offensive coordinator every single year at Alabama. And I do think that's a positive for him, but because he's kind of showed that ability to learn that I think is important here. But also sometimes he's way more inaccurate with the football than he has any reason to be. He has this weird kind of, I don't know if you remember it, but you remember how Tyrod Taylor used to throw footballs?
Yes.
And it's like, it kind of reminds you of like kind of how Russ throws footballs, and like to an extent, PJ Walker throws footballs. Like it's this real teardrop ball that like, it's real pretty when it hits, but when it misses, it looks really bad because it has like such a sharp angle on it. I don't know how to describe it. I guess you guys will have the better language on it. He doesn't really attack the middle of the field very often. And, you worry about kind of just the general transition stuff with him. Where do you land with these two prospects? And do you think that these are guys who would fit in different offenses? Like what scenario do you think would be best for each of these guys individually?
Well, that's tough. Milroe, I think, is still really growing as a passer overall. I think this year what we've seen from him is the growth with his eyes in that offense. I think Kalen DeBoer is doing a really good job of putting him in position to learn how to attack the middle of the field. And I think that one thing that he's done really well is have answers against pressure. We saw that in the Georgia game where Kirby Smart would bring 5 or 6 guys, and they had schematically an answer to that pressure. And you saw Jalen Milroe start to grow as a passer when it comes to being able to make quick decisions. And so I think that kind of growth from him is very akin to what we saw with Jalen Hurts at Alabama, although Hurts, I think, was slowly from year to year just getting a little bit better from year to year. And I think we've seen a big step up from Jalen Milroe. But I do like that you brought up the way that he throws the football, because it's the ugliest thing that I've seen in a while. Actually, Dylan Gabriel at Oregon is uglier, but that's also a left-handed thing I just can't stand. But no, it's not good. The upper body mechanics with him have to be overhauled if he wants to have a consistent deep ball. It's way too flat. He cannot get air under the football, and that is a mechanical issue. I know that intimately because I played quarterback and I had that same freaking issue coming up. I just, for whatever reason, I could not get air under the football on my deep passes. And so when you throw a flat football like that, it's beautiful when you can actually get it to the outside and get it to where you need it to go. But you need to be able to let guys run underneath the footballs as well. Your margin for error is much, much smaller if you can't put air under it, especially if you have good athletes on the outside, which Alabama obviously has. So he's still growing. Shedeur is phenomenal.
Before you get to Shedeur, I want to ask a question about Jalen there. How do you evaluate arm strength when it comes to like the potential of somebody's? Because like it doesn't make physical sense at all, right? Because you look at Jalen Milroe and you're like, why is he doing all of this to try to get some air under the ball? He's a giant person, but then you watch like Pat Mahomes and he's like 6'1". He's just able to flick the ball out however he wants it to, or some of these guys are just much smaller, able to just flick the ball. Like, what do you think determines somebody's ability? Is it just like purely mechanics? Is it strength in somewhere that's not as physically apparent? Like, how do you, when you look at a prospect, you kind of measure their ability to improve their arm strength?
Yeah, it's flexibility. Patrick Mahomes, somebody who has a rubber band arm. You see it a little bit with Kyler Murray as well. He's a little bit more like, I guess the way that I would say it is like agitated, just because he's like everything he does is so quick. It's Energizer Bunny like. But with Milroe, he's very tight, and you can see that he has the potential in his arm because his passes have a lot of RPMs to it. It spins, but there isn't the flexibility to kind of drop it and use different arm angles in different situations and things like that. As athletic as he is, creating outside of the pocket, he is a little bit one-dimensional because he really only has that one arm slot to use.
All right. I'll let you get on to Shedeur. My bad. Just want to
I'll actually let Corey get on to Shedeur a little bit because he's watched, I think, every single snap he's taken so far this year, and I haven't watched every single snap he's taken so far this year.
Yeah. So again, I chart all these guys, right? Shedeur is the most accurate quarterback in the past 3 drafts that I charted. And I would push back on that. He has the most arm talent of any quarterback in this class. I legitimately don't. I mean, I think he has an average plus is probably how I'd put it, like probably a B arm.
Are you defining like arm talent by like distance or just like accuracy?
Drive on the football. I would say drive.
Okay.
Drive. So yeah, how many RPMs can you spin? Like what's your? And I would say he can drill tight windows, but I think that's more anticipation than it is velocity. He's a really great anticipatory thrower. And what I think I love most about him is that he fights to stay in structure for as long as he can. And that's kind of different from last year. I think he really wanted to, but he had such a distrust and such a disdain for his own offensive line by the midpoint of last season. He just kind of like hit this F it mentality and said, I'm going to do it myself. And again, he could hit that this year because again, he's still playing behind probably the worst P4 offensive line in the nation. Which is why, like when you're referencing like those pressure to sack ratios and like the sacks responsible for at the college level, I have to kind of give Shedeur a grain of salt around that as well, because he legitimately is playing behind perhaps the worst offensive line of any P4 team in the nation. And what he's done, his body of work against pressure this year, I think has been exponentially better. He's stepping through pressure. If you see him escaping the pocket, he's using his legs. He's not. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said I don't think he's a great athlete, because he's not. He wants to be a pure pocket passer, and I think that's where he's best. But he's doing a good job of stepping through pressure this year. And when he is escaping, he's coming up through the middle, and he's smart with the football. It's very rare to see him turn the ball over, especially as a runner. He'll never turn it over as a runner. He'll never take a big hit as a runner. He's very smart. And when we're talking about his ability to make plays in structure, and we want to talk about, we could talk about all day. Would Deion let him come to Cleveland? Does he want to come to Cleveland? All that. That's a completely different conversation. When we're talking about him in what Kevin Stefanski has been looking for a half decade in Cleveland, a literal half decade in Cleveland, like this guy is it to a T. Like this is the guy he wants to a T. His eyes, I think, blow me away more than any other quarterback in this class, especially in the face of pressure. For him to see those backside overs, to see those backside digs, and to throw them in the face of pressure. And he's throwing guys open too, like over the middle of the field. He'll anticipate windows to throw guys open. This last game against Kansas State, it was the last drive of the game. They lost that game, right? But last drive of the game, I mean, he got smacked in the face. And he threw an over, probably 18 to 20 yards down the field, threw an over into a non-existent window that he created. And the receiver couldn't bring it in, but it was just an unbelievable ball in the face of pressure. And so, yeah, his pressure to sack ratio is high. His sacks responsible for is high. But again, I have to create some context around that to say that he is playing behind.
Yeah, and it's such.
How do you project that with if he gets drafted in the top 5 of this draft, he's probably going to go to a bad offensive line in the NFL. So even though you're saying hey, this is partly the offensive line's problem at Colorado, how do you kind of rectify that with that's probably going to be his reality if he gets drafted where we anticipate him getting drafted?
I mean, look at what Drake May did in New England last week. Yeah, he threw 3 picks, but I think one was really fluky off the side of a helmet. But he still threw 3 touchdowns, and he still was able to find windows just by getting the ball out on time. I mean, look at what Joe Flacco did last year in Cleveland with Duron Christian, James Hudson playing offensive tackle. Offensive play callers at the NFL level are so good at moving pockets, are so good at scheming up windows to throw into that. As long as you are not holding the ball for 3 seconds, as long as you are not scrambling into the backs of offensive linemen, you should be okay to find a window. You should be okay to get the ball out on time. As long as you know where you're going with your eyes, pre-snap, post-snap, are smart enough to know where to get the ball out to.
And I think the context with that too is think about Justin Fields, somebody who bad pressure to sack rate, played behind an offensive line at Ohio State that was unbelievable. So he never had to really learn how to get the ball out quickly. with Shedeur, he ain't got no other option. He's got to get the ball out or he is getting sacked. And so you already have that experience with needing to get the ball out on time, be able to work in schedule, be able to throw anticipatory passes. And then obviously with the accuracy as well, I think it's a little bit of context added to it. I think that it's a good thing kind of that he is dealing with this at Colorado.
All right, Cole, you got any questions? Because you're big on Shedeur too. I get them texts every time Shedeur throw for like 200 yards. You wrong, a Milroe off my board. So this is your moment to shine here, Cole.
Okay, first of all, I want a little context. Q and Curtis, who's our producer, who's not here right now, they were so out on Colorado. They were so out on Shedeur. They said y'all gonna win.
We were out on Colorado. Not Shedeur necessarily. We were not.
I let you talk. Let me talk. They were out on Shedeur.
You spread lies.
Is this lies? Is this lies? According to my story, they were out on Shedeur.
Your truth.
They were out on Colorado. And I was like, I'm taking Shedeur before any other quarterback in this class. Not even thinking about it. But he's QB1 comfortably to me. That's just my opinion. Q said they was gonna get blown out by who was it? UCF?
Kansas State or UCF 2 weeks ago. Yeah,
he said they were gonna get blown out by UCF.
I didn't know they could beat UCF. They smoked them.
Smoked them. He said they were going to
came close with Kansas State.
You said they were going to get blown out by Kansas State. Should have pulled it off. Didn't. It's cool.
Kansas State's the toughest opponent they'll face. Kansas State will punch anybody in the mouth they play. Yeah, so that was an impressive game for me from Shedeur to be.
Yeah, they're a physical
Kansas State team. Chris Kleiman, like North Dakota. I think he used to be at North Dakota State, which is interesting, right? Because he played North Dakota State earlier. They haven't changed anything from the Chris Kleiman days. But yeah, Kansas State is like always and perpetually in the same place that but it's not Coach Snyder used to have them in. Like they're like always just like really solid 9-3, 8-4 team.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, me and Q have been debating this for a while, and I just kind of feel like, obviously, when it comes to Cleveland Browns, if they're going to take a quarterback in the top 3, which is where they're going to pick, you got to take Shedeur. Like you got to take him. Assuming the Deion stuff isn't like a real issue that they actually have to worry about.
Let's have a conversation about the Deion stuff then at this point, right? Because I think the Deion
stuff. Don't bow out of this conversation.
Yeah.
Now, I'll have this conversation. This one time I will have this conversation.
Yeah. Well, the Deion stuff like that, Deion won't let somebody get drafted there. I don't think that's the actual like stuff that comes with Deion. And like, I know people are worried about like the fan base and like selfishly, I'm like, I would rather somebody else emerge because like, I don't want to deal with another quarterback who has stands from day one, but that's just me being selfish and talking about the Browns. I think the stuff that concerns me with what's up.
Can I address one thing really quick with this fan base? That it's just the dumbest thing in the world. They keep talking about the circus that could come with Shedeur. And all I keep thinking in my head is, where have you been the last 3 years?
Well, that's what people are saying. That's the whole point, though. People have been dealing with the circus since 2018. There was the Baker circus. There was the Deshaun Watson circus. I think there is a legitimate desire for people to be like, not want to have a quarterback who already comes in built in with like polarization at the point. Like Baker was polarizing for obvious reasons. Deshaun Watson was polarizing even before his play became terrible.
That's my thing, though.
It's not the same level of that. But it's still there, though. It's still there, though.
It's
right?
Probably like the Baker level. I would say
it would be back to Baker level.
I would say with Baker was on the fence. Like, you want your quarterback to have a healthy level of ego. You want your quarterback to have a healthy level of confidence. And I would say Baker on a week-to-week basis would jump the side of the fence. What side was his ego on that week-to-week? And I think Shedeur is probably on that level of ego. Although, you won't catch that guy lacking confidence. But that's not a bad thing to have in your freaking quarterback, man. It's the most important position in professional sports.
I don't think that's the issue with him. I think more or less the question is like, this is somebody who's Deion Sanders has always been a big part of his son's career. Ever since high school, right? Prime Academy, he's coaching his son. His son gets to college age. All of a sudden, he's coaching Jackson State, one of the schools that are willing to start him. And then he goes to make the jump to P5. his dad comes with him and with the job move to Colorado, right? So like there is an element of like Deion's not like a regular helicopter parent. I think it's pretty obvious that he's a bit of a helicopter when it comes to Shedeur. This is Deion Sanders, who is a much more like LeVar Ball. I think some people make the comparison to LeVar Ball was like fun and entertaining, and he was on ESPN and stuff. But nobody was going to hire LeVar Ball to be their coach if things went wrong around Lonzo. The thing with Deion is, if Deion is dissatisfied with anything that the team is doing, whether it's righteous or not, that's going to carry a lot of weight that it wouldn't necessarily carry with any other parent in that situation. And it doesn't seem like, to me, from what I've seen with Deion, that that's going to be something he's going to make a really strong effort to avoid doing, especially when it comes to Shedeur. And I just wonder, like, if you draft Shedeur, you have to think about that being a part. Like if Kevin drafts him, and let's say the first year isn't what we want it to be, or the second year isn't what we want it to be, I don't think it's necessarily Deion's going to get you fired and take your job, but it is going to be Deion's going to say something that's going to become an even larger distraction for you to have to deal with in a locker room. And like, you know, like Shedeur's not going to probably be the best at like having the best quotes out the media, right? We're probably going to have to be like, hey, you guys are overreacting to this. This isn't what he meant. Like, we're going to have to do that whole game again with him too. So it's just managing those things, seeing like what the Deion stuff is. If you think he's the guy, I don't think it stops you from drafting him. But I do think if you draft him, you can't be ignorant to this. Like, you can't just say that's not going to be a thing. It has to be something that you factor in.
They might welcome that compared to what the media circus they've had to deal with the last 3 years, to be honest.
That really shouldn't be a part of our decision-making process. Like, nothing about these last 3 years. Yeah, nothing about these last 3 years should be anything we aspire to be better than. Like, it's okay. Yeah, it's better than Deshaun Watson. It's like when we're like, hey, we're better than we were in 99. It's like, okay, like we should probably get past the point to where we're having an anchor be the barn, which we're like, well, it's better than that, right? Like, I think that's the danger of having this Watson thing go on, is we're just going to go for anything that's better than it. And like Freddie Kitchens was better than Hugh Jackson. It didn't fucking matter, right? Like at the end of the day. So that's my whole thing with it, is like, I know we're low here and we're not really thinking about it because it's preferable to dealing with a guy who's been accused credibly of 30 plus cases of sexual assault and is a terrible quarterback on the field. But still, when you don't factor in the Watson stuff, it's like, if you're a team trying to build a healthy long-term organization, is this something you want to invite in if you're not 100% sure that this is the franchise quarterback? And like, how sure would you be that this is the guy that you want?
That's the tough part. I think no matter what, if you believe he's the better quarterback, you have to take him. I don't think it really matters if you're like, if Jalen Milroe comes in and interviews with you guys and like is the perfect human being, like the exact guy that you would want in your locker room. I don't think that should propel somebody over the better football player. Now, if you think that it's just an untenable situation with Shedeur, like Deion is going to be a problem, or Shedeur's attitude is going to be a legitimate issue. I mean, we're talking about the team that has had Baker Mayfield, Johnny Manziel, and now Deshaun Watson. So it's not like the Cleveland Browns haven't handled or dealt with this before. It's not like they haven't gone out of their way to have these guys on their roster. So I think if there's a team that can be that comfortable with it, it would be the Cleveland Browns. But the fans won't be comfortable with it. The fans shouldn't be comfortable with it. The people covering the team,
we really shouldn't be this comfortable. It has not worked out for us at all.
But Jimmy Haslam obviously doesn't give a single F about it.
The fans won't either if he goes out and wins football games.
Yes.
My question is, that being the case, right, that Jimmy's kind of going to let him do his thing and that Jimmy's okay with all of this stuff, is that the best environment for Shedeur too, like to develop in? Like, is that something you have to consider, that this might be somebody who you might want to have more of a strict environment around? Like, I don't know Shedeur personally. I don't feel comfortable like making like questions about his character. It's more for me, it's like, you want structure here, but if the Browns have proven that they don't have enough backbone to provide that structure when it comes to these personalities, is that a team that really should be drafting somebody who's done that? Because we've seen how that ends, right? When you don't have that structure there,
so I think
or that backbone.
I don't think that comes down to the front office or coaching staff. I think that comes down to the veterans in your locker room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's highly questionable right now. They could go out and they could sign some vets in free agency who are high character locker room guys, right? Like what I think they anticipated Dalvin Tomlinson would be. And perhaps he was last year, but he's another one of those 30-plus-year-old vets that seems like he might be checking out here a little bit. I think that's what Amari Cooper has been the last couple of years. You know, I think you can go out and you can get those veterans in those locker rooms right now, where I think that plays a bigger role than the coaching staff or the front office. But right now, as it sits today, I can name 2 of those guys that'll be in the locker room next year, and that's Myles Garrett and that's Denzel Ward. Neither of them have been explicitly vocal leaders. Like if we're going to be honest about what it is, they play on the field, they show up on the field, and they're lead every Sunday. They're both team captains, and this is Denzel Ward's first year being a team captain, so maybe that is a role that he's taken on. But neither of them have been explicitly vocal. This is my team. We will handle that kind of leaders in the locker room, if that makes sense. And those are the only 2 guys that I could tell you today will be in that locker room next year of that category of veteran leader.
Do you think that vacuum being there for leadership is something that's good for Shedeur or bad for Shedeur?
It might be. I mean, you see those rookie quarterbacks who get the C on their jersey in year 1, and that might be something that actually might be an environment that he would welcome and actually want to be a part of. I will say this about the Sanders family as well. I don't think you can discount – savior complex is the wrong way to say it, but I don't think you could discount perhaps their desire to be the one to turn the Cleveland Browns around.